Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest TMA virtual briefing, where we'll be discussing concerns with rising energy costs and how Illinois' legislative policies impact the affordability and availability of energy in our state. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's Government Affairs Consultant, and I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin, as well as two very special guests, former State Representative Keith Wheeler and former Illinois EPA Director Alec Messina. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. It's great to be with you today.
Well, thanks for being here. Well, we're going to spend the next half hour discussing the state's energy policies and their impact on energy costs, as well as other issues TMA and the Chamber championed in this year's legislative session. At the end of the program, TMA members will have an opportunity to ask written questions of Keith and Alec by typing them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. Now, I'll turn it over to TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin, who will introduce our special guests and get their thoughts on energy and the legislative session today. David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rich. I lobby for the Technology and Manufacturing Association in Springfield, these gentlemen, and we're fortunate to have with us today two special guests who are from the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, who are well-respected and well-versed on what's happening in Illinois with respect to our high energy prices and energy supply. Keith Wheeler is a former state representative who sat on the House Public Utilities Committee, and Alec Messina is a former director of the Illinois EPA, as Rich said, and he currently heads up the Illinois Chamber's Energy Council. So welcome. But we have a problem in Illinois with rising energy costs, and before we get into the reasons and what our TMA manufacturers can do about it, could either of you set the stage a little bit for us regarding what's been happening in Illinois in the energy field over the last 5 to 10 years so we can understand what's going on?
Sure, I'd be happy to maybe set the stage, and Keith, if you want to fill in some gaps, please don't hesitate. But I think, there have been two really distinct things that have occurred over the last decade or more. So first of all, our base load generation, and by that I mean coal-fired, gas-fired, and nuclear-powered electricity generation has been going through, kind of an evolution, if you will. Less so with nuclear, but coal and gas. This is, generally speaking, not to overstate it, this is kind of an aging fleet, and there have been as you would expect of some facilities that have been operating for 50 or 60 years or more. They've started to close down as technology has improved, as new types of generation are out there. And so whether it's because of an aging fleet or it's because of increased regulation, whether that is environmental regulation to reduce emissions from coal or gas-fired facilities, what have you, those have provided additional pressures on these facilities, financial pressures. And so when these generators are making business decisions as to whether or not they're going to continue to operate, and they're taking into account all these increased costs to meet these regulations, they're either slowing down or closing down operation of these facilities. So that's been happening over the last decade or so. At the same time, states like Illinois are starting to make significant policy decisions to expedite, if you will, the transition from this traditional sources of energy to renewable energy. And so we've seen, I think, Dave, you mentioned the last decade, we've seen a handful, 3 different energy proposals become law. The latest was the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And all of these proposals really had one thing in common, and that was to incentivize these new forms of generation: wind, solar. We talked a lot this last spring, even though nothing ultimately moved. We talked a lot about battery storage, and these are all important components to round out our energy mix. I mean, the Illinois Chamber has always been kind of an all of the above supporter of all of these sources of energy. because the more types of energy or electricity you have available, then you're minimizing risk, right, for your members
Right.
because you know
Uh-huh.
you're not going to put all of your eggs in one basket. But these incentives have a cost, and those costs are typically borne by the large industrial users primarily. Illinois has policymakers, legislators have sought to shift those costs away from residential and smaller companies to the larger, medium-sized industrial users. And so you've seen, you know, pressure on our energy mix from both of these angles: aging fleet, additional regulation, and a desire to really incentivize this energy transition, which doesn't really matter if a legislator wants to say, well, we should encourage this transition to take place by 2035. It's wonderful to put that date out there, but a transition really takes time, and so that's really where you're getting a lot of the friction right now, is a desire to expedite this transition, but life and energy markets don't really work that way.
Right.
Yeah, let me just add a couple things on that. If that's okay, David. One, thank you, Alec, for the depth of the background there, because Alec is my resource at the Illinois Chamber for energy issues. And he has been actually before I was at the Illinois Chamber. When I was a legislator, he was a great go-to person because he has such a good history involved, and he can balance all the different variables that are in play here. And there are so many variables in the energy space. So just a quick reflection on sitting through the CEJA discussions. At the time, I was a spokesperson on the Public Utilities Committee, as David had mentioned. And that put me at the table, which means that I get to listen more than talk as those discussions were going on, and trying to balance, how do we keep our nuclear fleet intact? How do we more generation? We see the demand coming. We're going to incentivize electric vehicles. At the same time, our grid is going to have less generation. How is that going to balance out? And we're starting to see those pressures, right? Supply and demand still apply in the energy markets like they do in almost every market. And our demand is growing. At the same time, to Alec's point, we've got an aging fleet, things are aging out. There's also, what we haven't talked about is federal policy impacts what we get to do at the state level, and how ratepayers are going to feel that pain in the cases we're going through right now. So there's so many parts to balance here, and that's why it's great to have another mind here to talk about all the different components of energy as we try and figure out what's been happening over the last 5 years, because it affects what happens the next 5 years.
Right. Well, thanks. Well, I think you set the stage real well then. For my next question, most of our TMA members are on one grid that provides electricity and power to Illinois, and that's the PJM grid. And that grid goes over to New Jersey. I mean, it goes over to the East Coast. But anyway, this grid held an annual auction last year on rates. And can you explain that a little bit and what happened and how that's affecting prices today?
Oh,
Sure, sure. So, the PJM is like the other 6 or 7 regional transmission organizations throughout the country, and not only do they set rates, but they also send signals to the market that are intended to tell us, policymakers, decision makers, businesses, what we should be thinking about as we look forward.
Okay.
And so the capacity market, which is really what took the biggest hit. There's a market that really sets rates. There's a capacity market, and what those increases in the capacity market tell us is that these RTOs are sending signals to the market that we don't really have enough electricity as we see these closures, as we see renewable development not really hit the targets that states like Illinois are demanding or at least incentivizing. You don't have enough generation to meet our growing energy needs. And so by increasing the capacity prices, that is intended to incentivize the development of new generation. gas and coal-fired plants. Well, no one's building a coal plant anymore,
Yeah.
at least for the foreseeable future. We'll see. Federal policy may allow for that to happen, but certainly it tells us that gas-fired power generation shouldn't be closing. It's telling us that we need more power generation. And so by these high prices are supposed to tell enterprising developers that they should be considering new development, new generation to meet these growing needs. And again, to kind of harken back to our opening here, David, with the closures that are occurring just naturally because of
Yeah.
age, or the closures that are occurring because CEJA demands it by a certain schedule, how do you balance that out? And so these facilities don't get built overnight, obviously, and they don't get financed overnight, which is another issue. And so we're going to see, I think, for the foreseeable future, a gradual step up in these capacity market prices, which gives the RTOs like PJM, it gives policymakers at the Illinois Commerce Commission and those of us who are in this business, like Keith and I and you and everybody else on this call, real pause, because this is the beginning, I think.
Is the beginning of a period where basically we've gotten rid of a lot of energy that we used to rely on. They closed down because of regulations, and we haven't ramped up to the other renewable
That's right.
energy fast enough, just because it's who knows why. But
Yeah, a lot of reasons there too. I mean,
okay.
you've got a lot of pressures. Financing is a real big component because the contracts for some of this renewable development, the contracts don't last as long. So there's a real wariness from markets or from financiers to finance these projects.
Yeah.
But then also you've got another real interesting component here is the not in my backyard component where try and develop a 1,000-acre utility scale solar farm or wind farm in a agricultural area. Those county governments aren't particularly thrilled about what the sky, what the horizon's going to look like with windmills or losing agricultural land. There are real challenges there.
I can
Right.
understand that.
On top of that, just the idea of even get the interconnect from ComEd on spacing. So
Great point.
I deal with some of these projects locally, and it is a headache. And I've seen projects that go through that are in the right place. They don't necessarily negatively impact the neighbors or farmland, and yet you get through the whole process, and the rug gets pulled out because ComEd says, "Yeah, we actually can't make the interconnect happen now." And
It's a
so
great
then we've
point.
got this whole problem where we've done all the right things policy-wise. I'm not saying the right things. We've done things to incentivize this process, and then it fails because utility's not on the same page for that area. It's really complicated.
A lot of moving parts.
Right. Right.
And then they don't go in the right direction, and then one part
Yeah.
drowns the whole thing.
They've all, yeah, it's well, I hate to say house of cards, that's far too negative, but I mean, that's, one thing can really, it has a domino effect for sure.
So what do you think the outlook for energy supply and energy costs in Illinois for our manufacturers are for the next year, next 5 years, next 10 years? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you mentioned that maybe we're in a period of rising energy costs and what our members can look out for.
Yeah, you stole my line. I was going to reach over my shoulder and grab my crystal ball. I think certainly in the short term, there are going to be upward pressures on energy prices as we try and meet our demand needs. And obviously keep in mind that Illinois is trying to attract a number of other businesses as well, large users of electricity, whether those are data centers, quantum computing, which requires an extraordinary amount of electricity. So, we've got growing need, and we are still kind of struggling to meet that need with our existing resources. So, yeah, I think in the short term, certainly there's going to be that upward trend Maybe not quite the same sticker shock that we got during the last PJM auction, excuse me, but because that was a pretty big jump. But again, I think that's certainly where we're headed. And we really haven't talked yet about this last spring where we really saw an effort to incentivize battery storage, and the reason that's an important component ultimately is wind and solar, that generates intermittent electricity. Sun doesn't
Mhm.
always shine, wind doesn't always blow. And so, and electricity just doesn't sit there forever. You've got to
Right.
continue to generate it. So battery storage is really that is supposed to be complementary and
Mhm.
store some of that energy that is generated by those facilities. So that way, when they're not generating, you can rely on that battery storage. Well, the latest proposal that ultimately did not move forward, but is going to continue to be a subject of a great deal of discussion and negotiation, was incentivizing the development of battery storage. And the latest proposal, by many estimates I'm comfortable with, suggests that it would have cost $7 to $10 billion just to generate 6,000 megawatts of electricity from battery storage over the course of, gosh, what was it? 20 years, I think. So, and that's 6,000 megawatts, not a ton. So,
Oh, okay.
how do you pay for that?
Right.
And that's, so again, we may be in a position where we're having to take a look at some of these closure dates for gas-fired power that were contained within CEJA. We're gonna talk about some of, what are, and Keith highlighted one with interconnection, but what are the hurdles that are keeping us from developing wind and solar at the rates that are necessary to meet our needs? So, I would say all signs are pointing to continued cost increase, continued challenges, certainly in the 2 to 5 year range.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Just to
I'll put my
follow on
crystal
with
ball back over my shoulder.
yeah,
Yeah.
good luck with that. The um, pressures that are coming from other directions as well. Big beautiful bill that's gone
Mm,
through is removing a lot of solar incentives. So
right.
people who are developing in that space are taking another pause and saying, can they also get financing for new projects? Are they going to be able to make the costs work out? Because it's not cheap to put those fields together, and the incentives
Right.
made that happen. If they're not going to be there, does that then also diminish our supply options going forward? And again, so many variables in this space here. None of them point to lower costs right now, that I can see. So
Right.
flipping just the kind of the question over is what could alleviate pressure? And the only extreme thing I can think of, and Alec, you can correct me if this is off base, but back in the CEJA discussions, the RTOs mentioned that if the grid becomes, I guess, unstable in some respects, they can almost require some of those coal plants to not turn off and stay online for the period of time,
Yeah.
even if it does not meet the state's energy goals that they've set for themselves.
Well, I know actually, I just read this the other day that the Trump administration, that 3 times, the Biden administration and then Trump administration now, for the third year, has granted us an exception or an emergency power plant in Pennsylvania in case we don't have uh, uh, in case we have peak times where we can't cover the large
Right.
energy outflow. Is that
Yeah, and I think that's true. And Keith is right to point that out, that there is kind of this off ramp, if you will, that
yeah?
that allows some of these facilities that are scheduled for closure in 2030, 2035, 2040. Here's the problem, however. So if you own a gas-fired peaker plant in the northeastern part of the state, and a peaker plant is a facility that only turns on and generates electricity during periods of high demand, peak demand. It's a real clever name, obviously. Um, and so you own one of these facilities, been operating for 30 or 40 years, and the state is telling you you're going to close by 2030, but the feds are telling you, well, but stick around because we may need you. Well, you're a business. Are you going to make the necessary investments
Mm,
in
mhm.
2028, in 2032, in 2037 to make sure that that facility is operating at peak efficiency?
Right.
You're not, because you're not sure whether you're going to recoup those costs, and they're significant costs. Not to mention, the employees and all these other things that go
Right.
into it,
Right.
right? So, I mean, these are real pressures,
Real.
and to make that gamble on a multi-million dollar improvement when you may or may not get the call from PJM.
Hmm.
Well, again, let's go back to the financiers. That's not something they necessarily are excited to gamble on.
Yeah, that's
So
good point.
many variables in this,
Good
guys.
point.
So
Well,
many.
how, if there is, I mean, the big beautiful bill, you mentioned that, Keith. I mean, can they ramp up, how soon could they ramp up, you know, could they ramp up coal production in Illinois, to, meet that gap? Clean coal, I should say. We had the cleanest coal plant here in Springfield that, shut down, and, it was a pretty good clean coal plant, but anything like that in the horizon that could bridge the gap?
Tell you what, that's
Keith?
uh,
Yeah. No, go ahead, Keith.
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Alec. Because I mean, realistically, from my perspective, we've got a carbon sequestration option going forward. That's one of the things we did get put into the CEJA bill, but that has lots of other dominoes that have to fall in the correct way to keep our coal plants more viable past the date of, which was just a guess during that negotiation of what 2038. And I fought hard. My old district has folks who have invested in Prairie State, and they're not going to have their bonds paid off until 2043. So it was a legitimate battle over that to try and find a balance there. But uh, we don't have any answer on some of those things. And Alec, maybe you've got more insights than I do on that part of it currently.
Well, so I think new generation, new facilities, it's going to be a real struggle. Obviously, in Illinois, you've got some real significant political headwinds that the current administration it does not favor coal. You've got a sizable portion of our General Assembly that align themselves with environmental groups that have made it a priority to eliminate the use of coal to generate electricity. So I just can't see the billions of dollars that would be necessary to build new coal facilities.
Okay.
Build
Making itself
nuclear
available.
facilities fast enough.
Now, the flip side, though, real quick, I'm sorry, Keith. The other issue there is, we do have these dates in CEJA that there are a set of tier 2030. I've mentioned it before: 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. Those dates are important. The law basically said, depending upon your location, to certain areas that have large population centers, it requires the closure of these facilities. And I do think, as we get closer to those dates, we're going to have a real conversation. Legislators love to talk about the energy transition, and that's a real thing, and it's an important issue that we need to be thoughtful about. But a transition isn't just throwing out some dates and saying, "Hey, go hit these dates, and we're gonna do our best." You got to manage that transition, and I think we're going to have some tough conversations about what that transition looks like. Maybe we're going to have to consider changes to that law to allow some of these facilities to continue to operate who only provide power during peak demand, as an example. So, these conversations are ongoing, but what do businesses like more than anything else? They like certainty. They want to be able to plan around what's going to be happening 2, 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And right now, the state of Illinois isn't really doing a great job of providing that certainty so that they can plan.
Okay. Well, my last question, before I throw it back to Rich here is, since we're getting close to the hour and, it's like a half-hour sitcom. We solve the problem at the end of this half hour, by the way. Um,
Gotcha.
but do you recommend investments in solar energy for individual facilities for our TMA members, or just in a few years here, just kind of watch and go?
Where's that crystal ball you had there, Alec?
No, it's boy, it's not $1 million question, it's the $1 billion
Yeah.
question.
Well, there's so many
Yeah,
variables, right?
I mean, listen, I'll tell you right now, we have members that are considering that right now.
Hmm.
And how do they, whether it's developing their own generation on site, but we also have members that have industrial boilers, that's what we call them, that generate their own electricity on their facility, and they're also in the process of switching from coal to gas and sequestering and all these things. So, it's an expensive consideration. It's probably one that may make sense for some people as they're looking to plot all of these trends out, and with the uncertainty from policymakers not really knowing for sure. So, I certainly can see some companies deciding, we need to settle this issue for the next 20 to 30 years. And the only way we can be certain of us having sufficient, reliable, reasonably low cost energy is to march out on our own and settle this. But it's an expensive endeavor for sure.
Yeah.
Another way
Okay.
to look at it, David, I would say is that up until the big beautiful bill, I would be inclined to say, yeah, it makes sense. And now I'm thinking, well, maybe because there's just too much dependent on the incentive part of this to make it
Mhm.
balance out, that now be beyond any kind of confidence that I have
Yeah.
that will make
Yeah.
sense for individual companies. It's
The
hard
incentive
to
piece
gauge.
has been pulled out.
Right.
So, okay, let's go to Rich. I'm sure he's got questions from our members, and appreciate the discussion. Thanks.
All
Thanks,
right, thanks, David. All right, so it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. We already have several in the queue. But if you'd like to ask a question, you can, if you're on your computers or using the mobile app, you can type it into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. And I'll read the questions and Keith and Alec can answer them. So let's go to the first question. It is, did the traditional sources really have the option to reasonably upgrade and not be aged out, or did Illinois policymakers, the majority party, tell them don't even try?
It's a great question, and I mean, all these things. If I was if I had this, if I was prepared for that question, which I probably should have been, I would have had a pie chart, right? That said, okay, it was 70% this and 20% that. I mean, you can't deny that aging out is a part of that pie chart, but there is no question that federal environmental regulations, that state requirements, state permitting had, in my mind, the most significant component of this pie chart that I'll be working on after we hop off the call. So that was the biggest of the drivers, certainly. The Clean Air Act, the desire to slowly ratchet down on emissions from these facilities, and frankly, the last, with the exception of a few years when we were fortunate enough to have Keith Wheeler in the General Assembly, where that the state has really leaned hard on those facilities, and so that's been a real challenge, and also the stakeholders, environmental community. I mean, they have the Beyond Coal campaign was very effective in pushing policymakers in that direction. We have a Beyond Gas campaign that's already in place, so it's a good
I'll add
question.
one quick thing on that, and that would be that I think I spent about 2 years of my time in the General Assembly talking about coal ash and liability and litigation that goes along with that. And then another reason for coal plants to say, hey, you know what? This probably
Right.
isn't a good long-term strategy for us because we're going to get sued into oblivion. So another thing we didn't protect them on, and they didn't necessarily do the greatest job protecting themselves, but it's one of those pieces that also has a part of, why things aren't where they used to be.
Good. That's a great point too, Keith.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. All right, we got another question. This one is from a TMA member, says, how is Illinois positioned with energy relative to other states that have a lot of manufacturing and relative to other states in general?
Yeah, it's a great question because we're on a bit of an island, Illinois, in that we really are adopting policies, legislative and regulatory policies that are intended to push forward with the development of wind and solar. Other states surrounding us don't do that. We also, Illinois is also unique in that, we don't guarantee rate of return like other states do, Missouri, for example. So you're generating power in Missouri, and you've got the guaranteed rate of return. That it's not the open market that we have here in Illinois. So the competition here also kind of sets us apart. So yeah, it's a great question. Illinois is unique in the policies that they're adopting. I mean, there are other states that are out there doing some of this too. Pennsylvania, New York, California, and the usual suspects, I guess. But yeah, so it's certainly, what we haven't talked about here, and I'll just leave it at this. We could be in a position at some point in the near future where we've lost so much of our baseload generation that we're importing power from, say, Indiana, that was generated by a coal or gas plant. And wouldn't that be ironic that all these policies really lead to us paying more for electricity from Indiana that was generated by coal-fired power?
And I'll just say real quick to add on, because we're running really out of time here, is that I'm grateful that we have our nuclear fleet in the PJM market that is so reliable, strong, and counts as clean energy. Because if we did not have that, we were based entirely on coal for our area, and I'd be even more concerned. And I'm concerned.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. Let's see, we got a couple more questions. We're gonna have to wrap up soon. Question is, why does the market need to incentivize a generator for their capacity and reserve power at all? Doesn't the market already do that automatically?
Well, that's the market that does it. So, we could probably talk, and we probably would need someone with a PhD to kind of walk through how the market approach and these regional transmission, or why they were conceived in the first place, quite honestly. But those, that capacity market is what is telling developers that they need to generate more power. And without that market signal, I'm not sure that we necessarily be seeing it in such a clear fashion as we're seeing it now. It's probably not a very helpful answer, but that's the best I can do.
I think that I would just add on that the incentivization part of the process is because of our policy changes and the direction that we've taken as a state, in our case, to say we want more, clean power. Therefore, we know that isn't balanced out in a market base because it would lose to coal and gas automatically if it had to be paid for direct up. So in order to achieve our goals, and I say ours as if, I'm the whole state of Illinois, I'm not, but what the policy of the General Assembly and the governor's office was chosen has required us to make these incentives available in order to have any kind of generation going forward. Otherwise, we're going to go depend on the cheapest ones, which are not the ones that we have chosen as a path forward. So
great, thanks, Keith. All right, we don't really have any more questions, but we do have a nice comment from Mariella from Verity Solutions, who's a solar developer based out of Chicago and a fellow TMA member. They're actually holding a lunch and learn on August 19th for TMA members to learn more about solar as a solution, and to discuss how the Big Beautiful Bill will impact those incentives that we discussed earlier. So Mariella just said to keep an eye out on the TMA event calendar for more information. Thanks, Mariella. All right, well, that'll do it for our virtual briefing today. Keith and Alec, do you guys have any closing thoughts for TMA members before we break?
It's really, those were great questions. I really appreciate it. Very thoughtful questions. And this is, Keith hit on a couple different times. I mean, this is a very complicated issue, a lot of factors, a lot of variables that impact each other, and I hope we were able to at least highlight some of the challenges and thoughts moving forward. And always happy to have any follow up, Rich, David, if there's anything that we can do moving forward, don't hesitate to let us know.
Yeah, and I'll just say to members, thank you, first of all, for participating. Second of all, stay engaged. I mean, this is an issue that legislators need to understand the impact on our manufacturing community, because it's so vital to every part of Illinois, and all the families that are dependent on manufacturing have a voice and a vote. So staying engaged and understanding what's going on policy-wise and trying to get there beforehand. And you've got, wonderful advocates for you. And David's in Springfield all the time, and he's ready to go to work. And there really is an alliance of sorts between the lobbyists who represent different parts of Illinois and different components of the Illinois industry. But we're all trying to collaborate as much as we can to try and get the best policy going forward to protect our manufacturing environment.
I swear I don't need to have the last word, but Keith, you said something that was so important. David, Keith, Alec, all of us, we talk to legislators all the time. There is nothing more important than the folks on this call, the members that are engaged on this issue, to talk to your local legislators. They need to understand what these impacts are to you, what has happened with your energy costs, over the last 12 months, 2 years. Make it simple for them, because they hear from us all the time. What they don't hear, who they don't hear from, are the folks that are truly impacted. And you have a really important story to tell. So Keith that's really the most important message of today's, today's call, and that is, or briefing session. And that is, please, please, please develop those relationships if you haven't already, and help them understand what it means for you.
Good point.
And what it means to the families that work in those plants.
Yeah.
Yep. Great points, gentlemen. All right. Well, that'll do it for today's virtual briefing. Again, I want to thank former State Representative Keith Wheeler and former Illinois EPA Director Alec Messina for joining us today, along with TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin. And of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took time out of their day to join us. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.